Millionaire finds his 12-year-old adopted black daughter eating lunch in the rain. When he discovers the reason, he is devastated. And that's exactly what happened when Richard Sterling stopped his Bentley on that rainy Thursday afternoon. Heavy rain pounded the windshield when he spotted a small figure sitting alone on a park bench in front of the city's most expensive private school. For a second, he thought he was seeing things. But there was no doubt, it was Sophia, his 12-year-old adopted daughter, soaked to the bone, eating a sandwich that looked like it came from a cheap vending machine. Richard jumped out of the car like a hurricane. "Sophia! What the hell are you doing here in the rain?" His voice echoed across the empty square, mixing genuine concern with a growing anger he didn't yet know where to direct. The girl looked up, her large eyes reflecting a sadness that didn't match her 12 years. "Hi, Daddy," she murmured, trying to hide the sandwich behind her back as if she had been caught doing something wrong. At 45, Richard Sterling had built a real estate empire from scratch. He knew how to solve any problem with money, influence, or determination. But at that moment, seeing his daughter shivering in the cold in a deserted square, he felt a helplessness that money couldn't buy. "Why aren't you in school? Why didn't you call me?" He took off his coat and wrapped it around Sophia, noticing how much smaller and more fragile she looked than he remembered. "And where's Helena? She should have picked you up an hour ago." Helena was the nanny who had been taking care of Sophia for 3 years, ever since Richard adopted her after the tragic death of the girl's biological parents. She was a trustworthy, experienced woman who cost more per month than many people earned in a year. Sophia lowered her eyes, biting her lower lip, a habit she developed when she was nervous. "Mrs. Helena said that you were traveling and didn't leave any money for school lunch this week." Richard felt the world spin. He never, ever forgot to leave money for Sophia's expenses. In fact, there was an account with a standing authorization of $5,000 a month just for school expenses and emergencies. Helena had full access, credit cards, and instructions never, under any circumstances, to let Sophia go without. "That's impossible, Sophia. I always leave enough money and—" He stopped when he noticed something strange about his daughter's uniform. The skirt was patched with a rough seam, and the shoes, which had cost $300 the previous month, had holes poorly disguised with black paint. "How many days have you been eating lunch out here?" he asked, his voice lower now, but laden with a tension that made Sophia shrink even further. "Since Monday. But don't worry, Dad, I'm fine. The sandwich machine only costs $2, and I borrowed it from—" She hesitated, as if about to reveal a dangerous secret. Richard knelt on the wet sidewalk, not caring about the $1,000 suit he was ruining. He gently held his daughter's face, forcing her to look him in the eyes. "Sophia, tell me the truth. The whole truth. Daddy won't be mad at you, I promise." For a moment that seemed to last an eternity, she stared at him silently. Then tears mixed with the rain on her face. "Mrs. Helena said you don't want to spend money on me anymore because I'm not your real daughter." If you're feeling your soul shatter along with Richard's at this moment, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because what this father was about to discover about the people he trusted blindly would turn his pain into a thirst for justice that no one could imagine. But first, he needed to understand the true extent of the betrayal that was happening right under his roof, involving not only Helena, but people he would never suspect. The drive home passed in a blur of anger and disbelief. Richard drove on autopilot while Sophia, now warm and dry, slept in the passenger seat, exhausted from a week of silent humiliation that he hadn't even noticed. How could a man who had built a fortune by watching every detail have missed such obvious signs that his daughter was suffering? The question hammered in his head along with Sophia's words echoing like a nightmare, "Because I'm not your real daughter." When they arrived home, the $2 million mansion seemed different. Colder. Emptier. Helena was waiting for them at the front entrance, her face showing a perfectly rehearsed theatrical concern. "Mr. Sterling. Thank God you're okay. I was so worried when Sophia didn't come home from school." Her voice carried that devoted housekeeper inflection that Richard had always admired. "Where were you at 3:30, Helena?" The question came out sharper than Richard intended, but Helena didn't even blink. "I was at the market, buying ingredients for the special dinner I planned for when you returned from your trip. You know how Sophia sometimes gets distracted on her way home." She stretched out her arms to take Sophia's school bag, but Richard pushed her away. "Trip? What trip?" Richard watched Helena's reaction closely. "I've been in town all week. I had meetings at the company every day." For a fraction of a second, less than the blink of an eye, Helena hesitated. A microsecond of confusion that any normal person would miss, but which Richard, after decades of reading people in multimillion-dollar negotiations, picked up like sonar. "Oh, of course, sorry for the confusion. I've been so tired lately," Helena laughed nervously, accompanying them into the living room. "Sophia has been a little rebellious this week, Mr. Sterling. Nothing serious, just that early phase of adolescence." Richard put Sophia on the sofa and covered her with a blanket. The girl was still wearing the worn-out shoes he had noticed in the square. Shoes that had cost $300 just 6 weeks ago. "Helena, I want to see the receipts for Sophia's latest expenses. Uniforms, school supplies, lunches, everything." His voice maintained the professional tone he used when he was about to close an important deal. "Of course, Mr. Sterling. They're all organized in my folder, as always." Helena smiled, but Richard noticed how her hands twitched slightly. "Can I get them tomorrow morning? They're in my room, and I don't want to wake Sophia by making noise." "Now, Helena." The silence that followed lasted only 3 seconds, but it was enough for Richard to know he was on the right track. Helena nodded quickly and went upstairs, her footsteps echoing down the hall with an urgency she tried to disguise. Richard took the opportunity to examine Sophia's backpack. Inside he found notebooks with missing pages, probably sold or traded for food. Broken pencils held together with tape. And a crumpled note at the bottom of the side pocket that made his blood run cold. Sophia's childish handwriting had written, "Daddy doesn't want me anymore. Helena said he'll send me away when he gets tired of pretending to love me. I need to be a better daughter so he won't abandon me like my real parents did." Richard's hands trembled as he held that piece of paper. Sophia had been carrying this emotional burden alone, believing she needed to earn the love he had always considered unconditional. Helena returned with a surprisingly thin folder for 3 years of documented expenses. "Here you are, Mr. Sterling. As you can see, I've been very careful with expenses." Richard opened the folder and found receipts for only 2 weeks, all dated today. Clearly forged receipts with store numbers he recognized as non-existent. "Helena," his voice dropped to a dangerously calm tone, "where are the other receipts? The ones from the last 3 years." Well, there was a little accident with coffee last week. It stained some old documents, but don't worry, I have everything in my memory." Richard closed the folder slowly. "You know what I find interesting, Helena? In 3 years of working for me, you've never spilled coffee on a single document. In fact, you've always been obsessively careful." Helena swallowed hard but kept her forced smile. "People change, Mr. Sterling. And lately I've been a little distracted because," she glanced at Sophia sleeping on the sofa. "Well, taking care of special children is very demanding." "Special children?" "You know, children who come from different situations." Helena chose her words carefully, as if treading on a minefield. "Sophia has specific emotional needs because of her background." Richard felt a cold anger rising in his chest. "Go on." "Well, I just thought it might be better for her to learn early on that life isn't easy for people like her. That she can't always expect to have the same things other children have." Helena spoke faster now, clearly realizing she had said too much. "It was out of love, Mr. Sterling. To prepare her for reality." For a moment, Richard was completely silent. Helena interpreted this as agreement and visibly relaxed, even venturing a more genuine smile. "I knew you would understand. After all, you yourself once said that it was important for her not to be too spoiled." "I never said that." "Not directly, but when you travel so much, you make it clear that work comes first. And that's natural, of course. She needs to understand her place in your real life." What Helena didn't know was that Richard was recording the entire conversation on his cell phone. What she also had no idea was that in the coming days she would discover that she had seriously underestimated the man who dared to steal and psychologically humiliate her daughter. While Helena continued talking, revealing deeper and deeper layers of her cruelty disguised as care, Richard was already mentally planning how a woman who took advantage of his trust and tortured an innocent child would learn that some betrayals have consequences that go far beyond a simple dismissal. That night, after Helena retired to her chambers and Sophia finally fell asleep safely in her own bed, Richard went down to his office and did something he hadn't done in years. He called Marcus Thompson, his college friend who had become a private detective. Richard? Dude, it's 2 in the morning. Did someone die? Marcus' sleepy voice echoed through the phone. Marcus, I need a favor. And I need you to be discreet. Richard opened his laptop and began typing as he spoke. I want you to investigate my housekeeper, Helena Morrison. 3 years working for me, impeccable references, salary of $8,000 a month plus benefits. A housekeeper with an executive salary? What has she done? Richard paused, choosing his words carefully. She's stealing money intended for my daughter's care. And worse than that, she's psychologically abusing a 12-year-old child for racial reasons. The silence on the other end of the line lasted a few seconds. Marcus had grown up in the same neighborhood as Richard, but as a black man, he knew exactly the weight of those words. Send me everything you have on her. Photos, documents, payment history. Tomorrow morning you'll have a complete dossier. Marcus's voice had changed completely. And Richard? If she's doing this to Sophia, it's probably not the first time. While organizing the documents for Marcus, Richard decided to do his own preliminary investigation. He began by meticulously reviewing all bank statements from the last 6 months. What he found made his stomach churn. $5,000 a month was religiously transferred to the Sophia's expenses account, an account that Helena controlled completely. But when Richard called the school the next morning, he discovered that the tuition had been overdue for 3 months. Mr. Sterling, said the school secretary, clearly embarrassed, we sent several notifications. Sophia was almost suspended last week for non-payment. Impossible. I transfer $5,000 a month specifically for those expenses. Well, your housekeeper always said you were experiencing financial difficulties and asked us not to bother you directly. Richard hung up the phone feeling anger boiling up inside him. Helena wasn't just stealing, she was destroying his reputation and making Sophia feel like a financial burden. For the rest of the morning, pretending to work normally at home, Richard watched Helena discreetly. She behaved with disturbing naturalness, preparing breakfast for Sophia, cheap cereal instead of the organic granola Richard bought, checking her personal schedule on her cell phone while the girl bathed alone. Around 10 in the morning, Helena knocked on Richard's office door. Mr. Sterling, I need to go out for some shopping. Sophia is well taken care of watching television. What kind of shopping? Oh, household things. Cleaning supplies, some groceries. Helena smiled, but Richard noticed how she avoided direct eye contact. I should be back around 2. Sure. Take as long as you need. As soon as Helena's car left the garage, Richard activated the house's internal camera system, a security feature he had installed years ago but rarely checked. With a few clicks, he gained access to the recordings from the last 3 months. What he saw over the next 2 hours completely changed his perspective on what was happening in his own home. In the recordings, Helena was seen systematically taking valuables from the bedrooms, small jewelry, electronics, even Sophia's clothes that still had the tags on them. Even more disturbing, the conversation she had with Sophia when she thought she was alone revealed a pattern of meticulous and deliberate psychological abuse. Your father is thinking of sending you to boarding school, Helena said in a recording from 2 weeks ago. He told me he's tired of pretending you're real family. Sophia, sitting at the kitchen table doing her homework, had stopped writing. He said that. Not in those exact words, but I've been working with children for years, dear. I know when a parent is regretting an adoption. Helena continued tidying the kitchen as if they were discussing the weather. Especially when the child doesn't look like him. But he always says he loves me. Of course he does. He's too polite to be cruel to your face. But why do you think he travels so much? Why doesn't he ever take you with him? Helena turned to Sophia with a smile that Richard now recognized as sadistically fake. Men like your father marry women of their own social class and have children who look like them. You were just a charitable impulse that he's beginning to regret. Richard had to pause the recording. His hands trembled with pure rage as he watched how this woman had systematically destroyed Sophia's self-esteem over months. There was more. Much more. Recordings of Helena on the phone selling Sophia's belongings to acquaintances. Yeah, the girl won't even notice. Her father has too much money to keep track of every toy. Helena bragging to her friends about how she was saving a fortune for the Sterlings by using cheaper products and pocketing the difference. They don't even notice. Rich people like that don't know the real price of anything. And the most disturbing of all, Helena explaining to someone on the phone how she was preparing the girl for real life. She needs to learn early on that she won't be spoiled forever. It's better to create realistic expectations about her place in the world before she creates illusions. When Marcus called at 2 in the afternoon, Richard had already compiled hours of evidence of psychological abuse, systematic theft, and financial fraud. "Richard, you won't believe what I found out about Helena Morrison." Marcus's voice was charged with a controlled anger that Richard had rarely heard. She was fired from 4 previous jobs for theft or abuse of authority. Always in homes with interracial families or adopted children. How did she pass the background check? Fake references. Names of people who exist, but phone numbers that redirect to cell phones she controls. It's a sophisticated scheme, man. She's basically a professional predator who specializes in vulnerable families. Richard closed his eyes. "Marcus, I need you to document all of this officially. I want this woman not just out of my house, I want her in jail. I'm already preparing everything. But Richard, there's something you need to know. I found her bank records. Over the past 3 years, she has deposited over $200,000 into an offshore account. $200,000. Money that should have been spent caring for Sophia, providing her with a dignified and loving life Richard always wanted her to have." As he ended the call with Marcus, Richard heard Helena's car pulling up. She was returning from her shopping trip carrying bags from expensive stores, purchases made with money intended for the care of a child she had spent months convincing was unwanted. Sophia ran down the stairs to greet Helena, still desperately seeking the approval of the woman who tortured her daily. "How was your outing, Mrs. Helena?" Sophia asked in a small, hopeful voice. "Very good, dear. I bought a few things for myself. You know that people like me deserve to take care of themselves, right?" Helena didn't even look at Sophia as she replied, already climbing the stairs to her room with her purchases. Richard watched the whole scene from the top of the stairs, Sophia left alone in the room with that confused and hurt look that had become so common. At that moment, while his daughter tried to understand why she didn't deserve the same consideration that the housekeeper gave herself, Richard mentally finalized every detail of how Helena Morrison would discover that she had chosen the wrong family to try to destroy. What she didn't know was that Richard Sterling hadn't built a $100 million real estate empire by being passive with those who threatened his family. And in the coming days, she would learn that underestimating a father's ability to protect his daughter would be the biggest miscalculation of her pathetic career as a predator of vulnerable children. Richard waited until Friday to execute his plan. Helena had developed a predictable routine. At 10 in the morning, she would leave for her weekly shopping, meetings with buyers of the items stolen from the house. Sophia would be at school, far from any traumatic confrontation. But this time, when Helena came downstairs wearing an expensive coat Richard had never seen before, she found something unexpected in the living room. Marcus Thompson was sitting on the sofa, wearing a dark suit and an expression that Helena immediately recognized as official. Next to him, 2 federal agents were organizing stacks of documents on the coffee table. "Good morning, Helena," Richard said calmly, rising from the armchair where he had been waiting. Or should I say, Sarah Mitchell? Patricia Williams? Elizabeth Brooks? How many names do you prefer to use? Helena's face drained of color. Her legs trembled visibly, and she had to lean against the wall to keep from falling. "Mr. Sterling. I don't understand." Her voice came out as a broken whisper, but her eyes were already scanning the room for an escape route. Marcus stood up, showing a folder full of photographs and documents. "Helena Morrison, you are under arrest for financial fraud, aggravated theft, psychological abuse of a minor, and ideological falsehood. All meticulously documented by Mr. Sterling over the last few days." Ideological falsehood. Helena tried to regain her composure, but her voice trembled uncontrollably. "That's absurd. I've been working honestly for this family for 3 years." Richard approached her slowly, holding a tablet. 3 years of systematically stealing from a 12-year-old child and destroying her psyche out of pure racial sadism. He activated the screen, showing the recording of Helena saying that Sophia wasn't real family. Helena watched herself psychologically torturing Sophia, her own words echoing through the room like a death sentence. You recorded me? That's illegal." "In my own home? With a declared and registered security system." Richard laughed coldly. Helena, did you really think a man who built a real estate empire wouldn't know how to protect his own family? One of the federal agents approached with handcuffs. Ms. Morrison, in addition to the criminal charges, the IRS also has some questions about the $243,000 you deposited into offshore accounts over the past 3 years. $243,000, Helena repeated the number as if in a trance. Her mind calculated quickly. It was exactly the total amount she had stolen, including compound interest from the account she thought no one would ever discover. Marcus opened another file. We also have 4 previous families ready to testify about your pattern of behavior. All interracial families or families with adopted children. All with the same modus operandi of psychological abuse and systematic theft. Sarah Henderson from Atlanta, you stole $80,000 from her while psychologically torturing her Korean adopted son. Patricia Chun from Miami, $60,000 and 2 years convincing her black adopted daughter that her parents were going to send her back to the orphanage. Richard read the names as if reading a shopping list, his voice laden with a cold anger that made Helena retreat to the wall. You can't prove any of this. Helena shouted, finally losing her composure completely. I took care of that child. I gave her more attention than she deserved because she was black. Richard finished the sentence with a cruel smile. Because that's exactly what you said yesterday at 3 in the afternoon, when you talked to your sister on the phone about how you were teaching reality to Sophia. Helena opened and closed her mouth like a fish out of water, realizing that every word she had uttered in the last few months had been meticulously documented and catalogued. Marcus showed Helena his cell phone. Actually, you'll be delighted to know that your conversation was broadcast live to a WhatsApp group that included all the parents at Sophia's school, the council of the church you attend, and your neighbors in the condominium where you live. Broadcast live. Helena whispered, realizing the true extent of her public exposure. 47 people heard you explaining how black adopted children need to know their place, and how you were doing them a favor by preparing Sophia for the reality of the world. Richard showed her the real-time reactions in the group. The messages of condemnation have already surpassed 300. Helena slid down the wall until she was sitting on the floor, burying her face in her hands. You don't understand. I just wanted. What did you want, Helena? To torture an orphan child to feel superior? To steal money intended for her care to buy expensive clothes? Richard crouched in front of her, forcing her to look him in the eye. Or did you really believe you could do this to my daughter and get away with it? Marcus put the last documents in the folder. Helena, in addition to imminent imprisonment, you have 1 hour to voluntarily return all items stolen from this house. Otherwise, each item will be considered an additional aggravated theft. I don't have anything left. Helena cried, finally breaking down completely. I've already sold everything. The toys, the clothes, even her books. I have nothing to return. Richard stood up slowly, his expression changing from anger to something much more dangerous. You sold Sophia's books? The books that belonged to her biological father? The only memories she had of her dead parents. The question came out as a low, threatening roar that made Helena cower even further against the wall. I didn't know they were important. You didn't know? Richard laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. Or did you not care because in your sick mind, a black child doesn't deserve to keep memories of a family that loved her unconditionally? Marcus handcuffed Helena as she sobbed uncontrollably. Helena Morrison, you are under arrest. You have the right to remain silent. As her rights were read, Helena looked at Richard with a mixture of despair and anger. You think you're being the perfect father? You think destroying my life will erase all the years you neglected this girl? Richard smiled for the first time in days, but it was a smile that made Helena immediately regret speaking. Helena, over the next few months, while you're in prison trying to explain to your fellow inmates why you were torturing an orphan child, I'll be doing something you never understood. He paused at the door, watching her being escorted out. I'll be being a real father to my real daughter, giving her all the love and opportunities you tried to steal. When the sirens finally faded away, Richard was alone in his house for the first time in months without feeling that his daughter was in danger. In the silence that followed, he realized that true justice had not only been exposing Helena, it had been discovering that his love for Sophia was unquestionable, unconditional, and unshakable, exactly as it should have been from day one. But the question that remained was simple: How to explain to a 12-year-old girl that the person she was desperately trying to please was actually being arrested for torturing her. And more importantly, how to regain the trust of a child who had been systematically convinced that she did not deserve to be loved. When Sophia came home from school that afternoon, she found Richard waiting in the living room with a wrapped gift and tears in his eyes. "Daddy? Why are you crying?" Sophia ran to him, her backpack falling to the floor. "Because I failed you, princess." Richard hugged her as if she were about to disappear. "But that will never happen again. Helena is gone forever, and you need to know the truth about everything." Over the next 2 hours, Richard gently explained how Helena had lied about everything, how he had never thought of sending her away, how he had always had plenty of money to take care of her, how she was exactly the daughter he had always dreamed of having. "So you really love me?" Sophia asked in a small voice. "Sophia, I love you more than my own life. And do you know what the difference is between us and Helena?" Richard gently dried her tears. "Helena never understood that a real family has no color, no origin, it has love." 2 months later, while Sophia was playing piano at her new private school, with tuition paid 3 years in advance, Richard received a call from Marcus. Helena was sentenced to 5 years in prison. Aggravated theft, child abuse, tax fraud. And Richard? The other families she harmed are suing for damages. She'll get out of jail penniless. Richard watched Sophia laughing with her new friends, children who accepted her exactly as she was. He smiled when he realized that the best revenge against Helena had not been to destroy her financially. It had been to prove that a different child could flourish when truly loved. Sophia had become a brilliant, confident, and happy student, everything Helena had tried to prevent her from being. Richard learned that protecting those we love is not only a duty, it is the only thing that really matters in life. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel to discover more stories about how true love always conquers prejudice, and how sometimes the best revenge is simply to be happy.